You don't forget the moment you realize someone has turned on you. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a message left on seen. Sometimes it's a smile in public and a cut in private. Sometimes it's the way your name suddenly stops being spoken in rooms you belonged in. Betrayal doesn't only break trust. It rearranges your reality. It makes you replay conversations, searching for what you missed. I used to believe betrayal was rare, something that happened to unlucky people who trusted the wrong monster. I wanted that story because it was clean. If betrayal is random, then there's nothing to learn, nothing to change, and no responsibility except to heal. But then it happened more than once. Different people, different reasons, and yet the emotional shape was the same. So that's when a harder thought formed. What if betrayal isn't random? What if it follows a pattern? Most people don't wake up and decide, today I'll betray someone I care about. They wake up and decide, I need to protect my image, or I can't afford the risk, or if I stay loyal, I lose something. Betrayal often starts as a negotiation inside a person's mind. They trade integrity for comfort. They trade loyalty for safety. They trade you for a version of their life that feels easier to manage. And the scariest part is this. They can still think of themselves as a good person while they do it. A close friend of mine learned this the brutal way. He was building a small business, and one of his partners, someone who toasted him at dinners and called him family, began leaking ideas to a competitor. When the truth came out, the partner didn't even look ashamed. He looked relieved, like a man stepping out of a heavy coat. His excuse wasn't hatred, it was convenience. I had to think about my future, he said. That sentence revealed the trade. My future over your trust. Another example is closer to home. In my own family, I watched a relative stay silent while someone else spread lies about me. Lies that threatened my reputation and my peace. Later, when I asked why they didn't speak up, they didn't deny the truth. They just admitted they were afraid of conflict. I didn't want to make it worse, they said. And I understood something painful. Sometimes betrayal is not an attack. Sometimes it's a refusal to defend. The harm isn't only what people do to you, it's what they allow while calling it love. If you've been betrayed, you might feel foolish, embarrassed, angry at yourself for trusting, for opening your life to someone who could treat you like a disposable option. Hear me clearly. You weren't foolish for having a good heart. You were missing the map. Tonight, we draw that map together, calmly, honestly, and without excuses. This audiobook is not here to make you paranoid. It's here to make you precise. The goal isn't to hate people. The goal is to understand them well enough that you stop handing your trust to patterns you haven't learned to recognize yet. Over the next hour, we'll break betrayal down into its most common scripts: the convenience pattern, the status pattern, the fear pattern, the crowd pattern, and the story pattern, how people rewrite history to feel innocent. You'll learn why good people conform, why liars often believe their own lies, and why some betrayals are less about you and more about a person's need to stay comfortable. We'll also talk about recovery, how to rebuild trust without becoming bitter, how to set boundaries without becoming cruel, and how to choose relationships that don't require you to shrink yourself just to be kept. You'll get simple questions to ask, small tests that reveal character, and a way to heal that doesn't involve chasing closure from someone who benefits from your confusion. So take a breath. Let the anger be there without letting it drive. Clarity is power, and power can become peace. And if this speaks to you, share this video with a friend you know needs it. Someone trying to make sense of what happened, someone still blaming themselves, someone who deserves answers instead of endless doubt. Chapter 1. Betrayal starts as a trade, not a crime. Betrayal rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with calculation, not the dramatic, villainous kind you see in movies, but the math people do when they feel squeezed between what's right and what's easy. If you've been betrayed, you may picture the other person as cold, heartless, or evil. Sometimes that's true, but more often, betrayal is a trade someone makes in their own mind. Comfort over integrity, belonging over honesty, advantage over loyalty. Here's the uncomfortable part. Many betrayers don't experience themselves as betrayers. They experience themselves as survivors. They tell themselves they were forced, that the timing was complicated, that they were protecting their family, that they were just being realistic. In their story, as they didn't stab you, they adjusted to reality. That's why betrayal can feel so insane to the person on the receiving end. You're looking at the wound, they're looking at the excuse. So let's name the first pattern. Betrayal starts when the relationship becomes a balance sheet. When someone stops asking, "What do I owe this person?" and starts asking, "What do I get from this person?" The foundation quietly shifts. It doesn't always show up overnight. It shows up as small edits. Their attention becomes conditional, their warmth becomes scheduled, their support becomes transactional. They may still laugh with you, still say the right words, still call you family, while keeping score. And scorekeepers rarely protect your heart. You've seen this in small ways. A friend who only calls when they need something, and a co-worker who praises you when you're useful and distances themselves when you're not. A partner who is affectionate when life is smooth but emotionally absent when you're struggling. None of these moments scream betrayal yet. They are early signals that someone is practicing conditional loyalty. One of the cleanest tests is disappointment. When you don't meet their expectation, do they talk to you like a human being or like a bad investment? Watch for the sudden scorekeeping, the passive-aggressive jokes, the "I guess I'll do it myself" tone. That's loyalty turning into a receipt, and it never ends well. I watched a friend build a relationship with a mentor figure, charismatic, connected, generous with compliments. At first, it looked like real support. The mentor invited him into rooms he'd never been in and spoke about him like a rising star. But the moment my friend made a mistake, the mentor's tone changed. The praise disappeared, the invitations slowed, and one day the mentor casually suggested, within earshot, that my friend might not be stable enough for opportunities. When my friend confronted him, the mentor didn't apologize. He explained, "I can't risk my credibility," he said. Listen to the language. Risk, credibility, can't. That's the mind of a person doing math. It wasn't personal, he insisted. It was professional. But for my friend, it was personal because trust always is. And here's the lesson. Betrayal often hides behind reasonable words. It wears a suit. It speaks in calm sentences. It makes itself sound like common sense. The trade pattern shows up in families too, and where it can be even more confusing. Some relatives will love you but still choose the path that keeps peace with the loudest person in the room. They will say, "You know how he is," or "Let's not create drama." They aren't always trying to hurt you. They're trying to avoid discomfort, but avoidance can still be betrayal when it leaves you exposed. What makes this pattern repeat is that benefits are not stable. If someone's loyalty is tied to what you provide, then the moment you provide less time, status, money, attention, protection, they will feel justified in giving less too. That's why betrayal often shows up during transitions. When you lose a job, when you get sick, when you set a boundary, when you start winning. Transitions alter the balance sheet. They reveal who was there for you and who was there for what you represent. This isn't a call to become suspicious of everyone. It's a call to become observant. You can love people without handing them the keys to your life. You protect yourself not by building walls of bitterness, but by learning to read behavior without begging for reassurance. Here are 3 questions that expose the trade pattern early. First, what happens when you stop being useful? If you say no, If you can't help, if you're not available, do they stay respectful or do they punish you with silence, guilt, or coldness? Second, how do they treat weaker people? Watch how they treat someone who can't offer them anything. A junior co-worker, a service worker, a friend in a rough season. People who only respect power will eventually disrespect you when you lose leverage. Third, do they keep their values when there's a cost? Anyone can be loyal when loyalty is cheap. The moment loyalty costs them comfort, status, or convenience, that's when their true operating system shows. If you recognize the trade pattern in someone you care about, you don't need a dramatic confrontation. You need clarity. You need boundaries that make the cost of disrespect real. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is downgrade access. Keep the relationship, but stop treating it like a sacred place in your heart. And if you've been betrayed already, remember this: their trade does not define your worth. It reveals their priorities. It shows you how they manage fear, comfort, and identity. Your job now is to use the data. Learn the pattern, so the next time someone turns a relationship into a balance sheet, must you recognize it before they collect the profit and leave you with the loss. Chapter 2. The convenience pattern. When loyalty becomes inconvenient, there is a moment in every relationship where loyalty stops feeling like a compliment and starts feeling like a cost. Most betrayals happen right there, at the edge where doing the right thing becomes inconvenient. Not impossible, not dangerous, just uncomfortable enough that a person starts looking for an exit. Convenience betrayal is the kind that doesn't announce itself with shouting. It shows up as distance, delay, and deniability. I didn't see the message. I've been so busy. I didn't want to get involved. It's betrayal by retreat, and it hurts because it's quiet. You can't point to one violent act. You can only feel the absence where support used to be. I learned this pattern through someone I once called a brother. When I was doing well, he was everywhere, calling, celebrating, sharing my wins like they were his. But when I hit a rough season, when I needed him to vouch for my character while rumors were spreading, he vanished. Not forever, just long enough for the moment to pass. Later, he reappeared with a smile and a story about stress, family, exhaustion. And a part of me wanted to accept it, because accepting it would mean I didn't have to change how I saw him. But the truth was heavier. He didn't leave because he hated me. He left because staying would have cost him something. That's what makes the convenience pattern so common. It doesn't require someone to hate you. It only requires them to love comfort more than they love courage. Here's how it works inside the mind. When trouble shows up, conflict, criticism, or consequences, some people immediately scan the room for the safest position. They don't ask, what is right? They ask, what is safe? If standing with you could create friction, they step back. If staying neutral makes them look reasonable, they call it maturity. If abandoning you protects their image, they call it boundaries. The easiest way to spot this pattern is to watch what people do when a situation demands a small sacrifice. A difficult conversation, a public stand, a truthful sentence, a little time. People who only support you when it's easy will often disappear when support requires even minor discomfort. A friend of mine had a co-worker take credit for his work in a meeting. Everyone saw it. Afterward, several colleagues told him privately that was wrong. But when he asked one of them to back him up in the next meeting, the answer changed. I don't want to get on his bad side, they said. In private, they were moral. In public, they were convenient. That is betrayal. And it's also a warning. Someone's private opinion doesn't protect you, only their public action does. Convenience betrayal thrives in groups because groups reward agreement. The crowd offers safety. The individual pays the price. That's why, when you're being criticized or pushed out, the people who once smiled at you may suddenly become quiet. They are afraid of becoming the next target. So they do the simplest thing. They let you take the hit. If you've lived through this, you may carry a painful question. Were they ever real? Sometimes the answer is yes. They were real, but weak. They cared, but not enough to pay a price. And that distinction matters. Thus, you don't heal by pretending they were monsters. You heal by accepting what they are, people whose loyalty has a low inconvenience threshold. So what do you do with that knowledge? You stop placing high-trust expectations on low-courage people. One of the healthiest skills you can develop is tiered trust. Not everyone deserves the same access. Some people are good weather friends, fine for laughs, light conversations, shared hobbies. They can be kind, but they are not built for storms. If you expect storm support from a good weather person, you will keep feeling betrayed because you're asking them to be someone they've never practiced being. Tiered trust isn't bitterness, it's accuracy. Here are 3 practical ways to protect yourself from the convenience pattern without becoming paranoid. First, watch their relationship with conflict. Do they handle tension with honesty, or do they disappear? A person who avoids conflict at all costs will avoid defending you when defending you creates conflict. Second, notice how they behave when the group mood shifts. If they change their stance based on who is watching, they are not anchored by values. They are anchored by optics. Third, pay attention to how they interpret your boundaries. When you say no, do they respect it or do they punish you? Convenience-driven people want access without responsibility. Now, there's a deeper layer here. You can accidentally train convenience betrayal by rewarding it. If someone disappears when things get hard and you welcome them back like nothing happened, you teach them that abandoning you has no cost. You don't need revenge, but you do need consequences. A consequence can be as simple as changing the level of closeness. Less sharing, less dependence, less access to your vulnerable moments. It can be naming the behavior calmly. When I needed support, you stepped away. I'm adjusting how much I rely on you. That sentence isn't an attack. It's a boundary in plain English. Sometimes your healing requires you to grieve the fantasy, not the person. You grieve the version of them you thought you had. The loyal friend, the brave partner, the protective sibling. The grief is real, but it's also freeing. And then remember, you are allowed to adjust, not explode. Quietly moving someone from inner circle to outer circle is not cruelty. It is wisdom that protects your future. If you want to rebuild trust after betrayal, start with a simple rule. Trust grows where inconvenience is tolerated. The people who deserve your deepest trust are the ones who stay present when it costs them something. Time, comfort, pride, popularity. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to be consistent when it's inconvenient. Because loyalty that only exists when it's convenient isn't loyalty. It's a subscription. And subscriptions can be canceled the moment the price goes up. Chapter 3. The status pattern. They betray upward. Some betrayals don't come from fear or convenience. They come from ambition. This is the kind that hurts quietly but deeply, because it often comes from people who once stood beside you, not behind you. The status pattern is simple and brutal. When someone believes their future is above you, loyalty becomes negotiable. Status-driven betrayal happens when relationships are treated like ladders. People climb while you're useful and step over you when you're not. They don't always push you down. Sometimes they just let go and keep climbing, and later they tell themselves it was just growth. The reason this pattern is so hard to accept is that it often wears the mask of self-improvement. The betrayer doesn't say, "I chose myself over you." They say, "I had to evolve," or "I'm in a different phase now," or "I'm surrounding myself with people at my level." On the surface, it sounds healthy. But underneath, it's often the same old math. Proximity to power is worth more than loyalty to people. I saw this clearly in a professional circle I once trusted. A small group of us were building something together, sharing ideas, supporting each other, struggling side by side. One person in the group started gaining recognition. Invitations came, new rooms opened, and slowly, their language changed. We became I. The group chat got quieter. When one of us needed support, they were suddenly busy. Eventually, that person aligned themselves with a more powerful group. When conflict arose between the two circles, they didn't defend the people who helped them rise. They stayed silent. And not because they disagreed with us, but because speaking up might have cost them access. That silence was the betrayal, and it revealed something important. Status had replaced solidarity. Status betrayal often follows moments of transition, promotions, new relationships, public recognition, social climbing. When someone's identity becomes attached to who they're becoming, they may see old loyalties as weight. They don't want reminders of where they came from. They want mirrors that reflect where they're going. The painful truth is this: some people don't betray you because you did something wrong. They betray you because you remind them of a version of themselves they're trying to escape. Watch how people behave around power. Do they become smaller, louder, more flattering, more agreeable? Or do they abandon their principles to stay close to influence? People who orbit power instead of values will always choose status when forced to decide. One of the clearest signs of the status pattern is selective courage. They'll be bold with people below them and careful with people above them. So they'll criticize peers in private, but praise superiors in public. They'll tell you the truth when it's safe and disappear when the truth would cost them something. This pattern doesn't only exist in careers, it shows up in friendships, families, and romantic relationships. A partner who starts treating you differently after they gain attention. A friend who distances themselves when they enter a higher status social circle. A relative who suddenly respects you more when your title changes, and less when it doesn't. What makes this pattern dangerous is that it can feel personal even when it isn't. You might ask yourself, was I not good enough? Or why wasn't I worth defending? But status-driven betrayal isn't about your worth. It's about their hunger. And hunger makes people justify things they would once have been ashamed of. There's another layer here that matters. Some people confuse growth with abandonment. They think becoming more means leaving people behind. But real growth doesn't require betrayal. It requires boundaries, honesty, and evolution, not silence and disloyalty. So how do you protect yourself from the status pattern? First, notice who stays consistent as their power changes. Pay attention to how people treat you when they gain something you don't. Do they become more generous or more distant? More grounded or more performative? Second, listen to how they talk about others. People who casually discard former friends, mentors, or partners will eventually do the same to you. Disrespect for the past is often rehearsal for future betrayal. Third, separate admiration from alignment. You can admire someone's success without assuming they are safe. Talent, ambition, and charisma are not character. If you realize someone in your life operates by the status pattern, the answer isn't confrontation. It's recalibration. You don't need to accuse them. You need to stop placing your emotional security in their hands. Reduce dependence, reduce expectation. Let their behavior set the distance. And if you've been the one betrayed this way, let this sink in. You didn't lose because you stayed loyal. You learned. Loyalty is not weakness. It's a filter. It reveals who deserves proximity and who only wanted leverage. There's a quiet strength in choosing people who don't abandon you when they rise. These are the people who remember names, who return calls, who don't rewrite history to make themselves look self-made. They don't need to step on you to stand tall. Status comes and goes. Character stays. As we move forward, remember this. The goal isn't to avoid ambitious people, It's to recognize who is climbing with you and who is climbing over you. Chapter 4. The Fear Pattern. Betrayal as Self-Protection. Not all betrayal is driven by gain. Some of it is driven by fear, and this type is especially painful because the people who betray you this way often still care about you. They just care about their own safety more. Fear-based betrayal doesn't look aggressive. It looks hesitant. It looks like silence. It looks like someone is slowly stepping backward while telling themselves they're doing the best they can. These are the people who say, "I just didn't want to get involved," or "I was trying to stay out of it," or "I didn't think it would get this bad." They don't attack you. They abandon you. Fear changes the way people think. When someone feels threatened by conflict, authority, social backlash, or loss, they stop thinking ethically and start thinking defensively, or their world narrows. The only question that matters becomes, how do I survive this without being hurt? And when that question takes over, loyalty becomes optional. I learned this pattern in a moment that reshaped how I see people forever. Someone close to me was publicly blamed for something they didn't do. I knew the truth. A few others knew the truth too. Privately, they admitted it was unfair. They were angry on my behalf. They agreed it was wrong. But when it came time to speak up, when a single sentence could have shifted the narrative, they froze. Later, I asked one of them why they stayed quiet. They didn't lie. They said, "I was scared it would come back on me." That sentence matters because it shows you the mechanism of fear betrayal. They didn't choose against you, they chose for themselves, and in their mind, so that made it acceptable. Fear betrayal often comes from people who avoid conflict their entire lives. They've learned, sometimes from childhood, that speaking up is dangerous. That disagreement leads to punishment. That visibility attracts pain. So they adapt by staying quiet, blending in, and letting others take the hit. This pattern is common in families. A relative knows you're being treated unfairly, but they won't confront the dominant figure. They tell you, "You know how they are," or "Let's just keep the peace." Peace, in this case, means your silence, your suffering, your compliance. Fear betrayal is also common in workplaces and social groups where power is uneven. When one person controls opportunities, others fall in line. They may like you, they may respect you, but fear convinces them that defending you is too risky. What makes this pattern so confusing is that fear-based betrayers often feel guilty. They don't celebrate what happens to you. They feel bad. They may even check in quietly afterward. But guilt doesn't repair damage, and regret doesn't equal accountability. Here's the hard truth. Someone can feel bad about betraying you and still do it again, because the fear didn't go away. Fear betrayal teaches you something essential about trust. Trust isn't built on kindness alone. It's built on courage. A person can be warm, empathetic, and supportive until they're tested. And fear is the test. So how do you recognize this pattern early? Watch how people handle pressure. When things get tense, do they become clearer or quieter? Do they lean in or disappear? People who vanish under pressure will vanish when you need them most. And notice how they talk about standing up for themselves. If they consistently describe assertiveness as drama, trouble, or not worth it, they've already told you how they'll behave when loyalty costs something. Pay attention to their boundaries with authority. People who never challenge unfairness in small situations won't suddenly grow brave in big ones. Now comes an important distinction. Understanding fear doesn't mean excusing betrayal. Yes, fear is human. Yes, not everyone has the same level of courage, but you are allowed to decide how much access someone gets based on how they behave under pressure. Compassion doesn't require self-sacrifice. If someone betrays you out of fear, the response isn't rage. It's a re-evaluation. You don't punish them. You reposition them. they may still be in your life. But they no longer get front-row access to your vulnerability, your reputation, or your future. You stop expecting protection from someone who has shown you they prioritize safety over solidarity. There's another uncomfortable layer here. Sometimes we unknowingly enable fear betrayal by making ourselves too easy to sacrifice. When you're the one who stays calm, doesn't retaliate, and absorbs damage quietly, others learn that letting you take the hit has no immediate cost. You become the safest person to betray. That doesn't mean you should become aggressive. It means you should become visible. Naming harm calmly, setting consequences, making it clear that your silence is not guaranteed. Healing from fear. Betrayal requires releasing a fantasy, the fantasy that people will become brave when it really matters. Some won't. Not because they're evil, but because they're unprepared. And here's the reframe that restores your power. Their fear is information. It tells you who can walk beside you in storms and who can only meet you on clear days. Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's one sentence spoken at the right moment. Sometimes it's staying when leaving would be easier. The people who can do that consistently, imperfectly, but honestly, are rare. Those are the people you build with. Everyone else, you appreciate them at a distance. In the next chapter, we'll look at one of the most dangerous patterns of all, the way people rewrite reality itself to justify betrayal, and how lies become believable even to the person telling them. Chapter 5. The story pattern, how people rewrite reality to feel innocent. After betrayal, one of the most disturbing experiences isn't what the other person did. It's what they say afterward, or more accurately, the story they tell themselves. Because betrayal rarely survives on truth alone. It needs a narrative, a version of events where the betrayer can look in the mirror and still believe they are a decent person. This is the story pattern, and it's one of the most psychologically powerful forces behind repeated betrayal. Most people cannot live with the identity of being the bad one. So when they cross a moral line, they immediately begin editing reality. They remove details. They rearrange timelines, they exaggerate your flaws and minimize their actions. Slowly, subtly, and the story shifts until their betrayal feels justified, necessary, even noble. You might hear things like, "You were asking too much. You changed. I had no choice. I was protecting myself. You would have done the same." Notice what's happening here. The focus moves away from their decision and onto your supposed failure. That's not an accident. That's psychological self-defense. I once watched this pattern unfold in real time with someone I trusted deeply. When they broke a promise that mattered, I expected at least honesty. Instead, I got a rewritten past. Suddenly, moments of support I remembered clearly were dismissed as misunderstandings. Boundaries I had set were reframed as control. Their betrayal was described as freedom. And the most painful part wasn't the loss. It was realizing we were no longer living in the same reality. This is why arguing with a betrayer often feels pointless. You're debating facts. They're protecting an identity. The story pattern works because memory is flexible. People don't remember events as they happened. They remember the last version they told themselves. Over time, the edited story becomes real to them. That's how someone can betray you and sincerely believe they were wronged. And here's the part that can mess with your head. The story pattern can make you doubt yourself. You replay conversations. You wonder if you were too harsh, too needy, too trusting. You start questioning your perception, your tone, your timing. So this is how betrayal extends beyond the act. It invades your sense of reality. But clarity returns when you ask one simple question. Who benefited from this new story? If the revised version conveniently removes their responsibility and assigns it to you, that's not truth. That's self-preservation. The story pattern shows up everywhere. In friendships, it sounds like we just drifted when one person clearly withdrew. In families, it sounds like that's not what happened when accountability would threaten hierarchy. In workplaces, it sounds like it was a business decision when someone sacrificed you to protect their image. In relationships, it sounds like I wasn't happy anymore when honesty would require admitting betrayal. Stories become shields. What makes this pattern dangerous is that it allows betrayal to repeat. Once someone learns how to justify crossing a line, that line becomes easier to cross again. Each retelling smooths the edges. Each excuse lowers the internal cost. And if you accept their story without question, if you rush to be the bigger person or keep the peace, you may unknowingly participate in your own erasure. This doesn't mean you need to confront every lie, but it does mean you must protect your internal record. Here's how. First, anchor yourself to facts, not explanations. What did they promise? What did they do? What changed? You don't need emotional consensus to trust your memory. Second, resist the urge to over-explain yourself. When someone has already decided on a story, more information won't change it. It will just give them more material to twist. Third, notice how they handle accountability. Now, people who are safe to trust can say, "I hurt you," without adding "but." The moment every apology is followed by justification, you're dealing with a story builder. There's another uncomfortable truth here. Sometimes the story pattern is tempting for us too. When we're betrayed, we may rewrite events to avoid pain. We may minimize red flags we ignored. We may romanticize the past to avoid grief. Healing requires honesty on both sides, but only one side has to change. Let me be clear about something important. You don't need them to admit the truth for the truth to be real. Closure doesn't come from their confession. It comes from your clarity. If someone rewrites reality to protect themselves, the healthiest response is not obsession, so it's distance. You stop asking them to validate what they are committed to denying. This is where many people finally break free. Not when the betrayer apologizes, but when the betrayed person stops needing the apology. You realize that the story they tell says more about their limits than your worth. You see that someone who must distort reality to feel okay is not someone who can offer you a stable connection. And then something shifts. You stop trying to be understood by someone invested in misunderstanding you. You keep your version of the truth intact. You stop negotiating with denial. You move forward without dragging their narrative with you. Because the most powerful thing you can do after betrayal isn't to prove your innocence. It's to live unconfused. In the next chapter, we'll look at how groups and crowds amplify betrayal and why conformity can turn ordinary people into silent participants in harm, even when they know better. Chapter 6. The conformity pattern. When the crowd decides who gets hurt. There is a special kind of betrayal that doesn't come from one person, but from many. No single face to blame. No clear villain, just a room full of people who knew better and chose silence anyway. This is the conformity pattern, and it's one of the most damaging because it teaches you a brutal lesson. People don't always follow truth. They follow safety. Conformity betrayal happens when the group becomes more important than the individual. When belonging outweighs conscience. When fitting in feels safer than standing up. And once the group leans in a direction, even kind people can become passive accomplices to harm. What makes this pattern so painful is that it often involves people who were never cruel to you directly. They laughed with you. They supported you privately. They even told you, "I agree with you." But when it mattered, when the group turned, when the narrative shifted, when the risk appeared, they aligned with the crowd, or worse, they disappeared. I experienced this in a social circle that once felt like home. When tension arose around me, Subtle rumors, side comments, a shift in tone. I expected at least a few people to ask questions, to check in, to resist the easy story. Instead, I felt the room cool. Conversations stopped when I entered. Invitations slowed. People who once spoke freely around me became cautious, measured, distant. Later, some of them reached out privately. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to take sides. It just felt easier to stay quiet. Easier. That word explains everything. And the conformity pattern thrives because humans are wired for belonging. From an evolutionary perspective, being excluded from the group once meant danger. So when social tension appears, many people instinctively choose alignment over accuracy. They adopt the group's posture, not because they fully believe it, but because resisting it feels risky. This is how ordinary people participate in betrayal without ever feeling responsible. Conformity doesn't require hatred. It only requires discomfort and an unwillingness to stand alone. You'll notice this pattern in workplaces where no one challenges a toxic leader, in families where everyone tiptoes around one person's behavior, in friend groups where one narrative becomes dominant and questioning it makes you difficult. The group doesn't need proof. It needs consensus. And then once consensus forms, the individual becomes expendable. Here's the most dangerous part. Conformity betrayal often feels justified by neutrality. People tell themselves they're not choosing a side. But neutrality, in the face of harm, is not neutral. It supports the direction of power. Silence is not empty. It leans. If you've been betrayed this way, the wound cuts deep because it attacks your sense of belonging. You don't just lose a person, you lose a place, a shared identity, a feeling of being seen. And the question that lingers is haunting. How could so many people see this and do nothing? The answer is uncomfortable but clarifying. Most people are not guided by courage, they're guided by permission. They wait to see what the group allows, and when the group allows harm, they follow. This is why conformity betrayal often comes with gaslighting. If you speak up, you're told you're overreacting, creating drama, or taking things too personally. The group protects itself by minimizing your experience. Acknowledging your pain would require acknowledging their silence. So how do you protect yourself from this pattern? First, stop mistaking private support for public loyalty. Someone who agrees with you in private but won't support you in public is not an ally. They are a witness, one who chooses safety over truth. Second, watch how groups treat dissent. Healthy groups allow disagreement without exile. Unhealthy groups punish it quietly. If speaking honestly costs people their standing, conformity will rule everything that follows. Third, notice who can stand alone. In every group, there are a few people who don't wait for permission to do what's right. They may not be loud, they may not be popular, but they are consistent. These are the rare ones worth trusting. There's also an internal boundary you need to set after conformity betrayal. You stop chasing group validation. One of the hardest lessons is realizing that clarity can cost you belonging. But belonging that requires self-erasure is not safety. It's captivity. You don't need to convince the group of your truth. Groups rarely reverse themselves. You need to protect your dignity and move toward environments where integrity isn't punished. This doesn't mean isolating yourself. It means choosing smaller, braver circles. Another painful realization comes with time. Some people who conformed against you will later regret it. They may apologize years down the line, once the risk has passed. Their remorse may be real. But timing matters. Courage after safety is not the same as courage when it counts. Forgiveness is a personal choice. Access is a strategic one. You can forgive someone and still decide they don't get close again. Conformity betrayal teaches you to ask a better question when entering groups. Not, do I fit in? But what happens here when someone doesn't? That question will save you years, because the right people won't require you to disappear to belong. They won't need a crowd to do the right thing. They won't wait for permission to treat you with respect. They may be fewer, but they are real. And once you've experienced the conformity pattern, you stop romanticizing groups. You stop confusing numbers with safety. You start valuing clarity over consensus. In the next chapter, we'll look inward at how weak or unclear boundaries can invite betrayal to repeat, and how strengthening those boundaries changes the entire dynamic without turning you cold or closed. There is a special kind of betrayal that doesn't come from one person, but from many. No single face to blame, no clear villain, just a room full of people who knew better and chose silence anyway. This is the conformity pattern, and it's one of the most damaging because it teaches you a brutal lesson. People don't always follow truth, they follow safety. Conformity betrayal happens when the group becomes more important than the individual, when belonging outweighs conscience, when fitting in feels safer than standing up. And once the group leans in a direction, even kind people can become passive accomplices to harm. What makes this pattern so painful is that it often involves people who were never cruel to you directly. They laughed with you, they supported you privately, they even told you, "I agree with you." But when it mattered, when the group turned, when the narrative shifted, when the risk appeared, they aligned with the crowd. Or worse, they disappeared. I experienced this in a social circle that once felt like home. When tension arose around me, subtle rumors, side comments, a shift in tone, I expected at least a few people to ask questions, to check in, to resist the easy story. Instead, I felt the room cool. Conversations stopped when I entered. Invitations slowed, and people who once spoke freely around me became cautious, measured, distant. Later, some of them reached out privately. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to take sides. It just felt easier to stay quiet. Easier, that word explains everything. The conformity pattern thrives because humans are wired for belonging. From an evolutionary perspective, being excluded from the group once meant danger. So when social tension appears, many people instinctively choose alignment over accuracy. They adopt the group's posture, not because they fully believe it, but because resisting it feels risky. This is how ordinary people participate in betrayal without ever feeling responsible. Conformity doesn't require hatred. It only requires discomfort and an unwillingness to stand alone. You'll notice this pattern in workplaces where no one challenges a toxic leader, in families where everyone tiptoes around one person's behavior, in friend groups where one narrative becomes dominant and questioning it makes you difficult. The group doesn't need proof. It needs consensus. And once consensus forms, the individual becomes expendable. Here's the most dangerous part. Conformity betrayal often feels justified by neutrality. People tell themselves they're not choosing a side. But neutrality in the face of harm is not neutral. It supports the direction of power. Silence is not empty. It leans. If you've been betrayed this way, the wound cuts deep because it attacks your sense of belonging. You don't just lose a person, you lose a place, a shared identity, a feeling of being seen. And the question that lingers is haunting. How could so many people see this and do nothing? The answer is uncomfortable but clarifying. Most people are not guided by courage. They are guided by permission. They wait to see what the group allows, and when the group allows harm, they follow. This is why conformity betrayal often comes with gaslighting. If you speak up, you're told you're overreacting, creating drama, or taking things too personally. The group protects itself by minimizing your experience. Acknowledging your pain would require acknowledging their silence. So how do you protect yourself from this pattern? First, stop mistaking private support for public loyalty. Someone who agrees with you in private but won't support you in public is not an ally. They are a witness, one who chooses safety over truth. Second, watch how groups treat dissent. Healthy groups allow disagreement without exile. Unhealthy groups punish it quietly. If speaking honestly costs people their standing, conformity will rule everything that follows. Third, notice who can stand alone. In every group, there are a few people who don't wait for permission to do what's right. They may not be loud, they may not be popular, but they are consistent. These are the rare ones worth trusting. There's also an internal boundary you need to set after conformity betrayal. You stop chasing group validation. One of the hardest lessons is realizing that clarity can cost you belonging. But belonging that requires self-erasure is not safety. It's captivity. You don't need to convince the group of your truth. Groups rarely reverse themselves. So you need to protect your dignity and move toward environments where integrity isn't punished. This doesn't mean isolating yourself. It means choosing smaller, braver circles. Another painful realization comes with time. Some people who conformed against you will later regret it. They may apologize years down the line once the risk has passed. Their remorse may be real, but timing matters. Courage after safety is not the same as courage when it counts. Forgiveness is a personal choice. Access is a strategic one. You can forgive someone and still decide they don't get close again. Conformity betrayal teaches you to ask a better question when entering groups. Not, do I fit in? But, what happens here when someone doesn't? That question will save you years. Because the right people won't require you to disappear to belong. They won't need a crowd to do the right thing. They won't wait for permission to treat you with respect. There may be fewer, but they are real. And once you've experienced the conformity pattern, you stop romanticizing groups. You stop confusing numbers with safety. You start valuing clarity over consensus. In the next chapter, we'll look inward at how weak or unclear boundaries can invite betrayal to repeat, and how strengthening those boundaries changes the entire dynamic without turning you cold or closed. Chapter 7. The Weak Boundary Pattern. Why betrayal repeats until something changes. After enough betrayal, a painful question eventually surfaces. Sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted. Why does this keep happening to me? It's tempting to answer that question with self-blame or bitterness. But the truth is more precise than either. Betrayal repeats not because you are weak, but because unclear boundaries make betrayal inexpensive. People rarely cross lines that cost them something. The weak boundary pattern isn't about being too kind. It's about being too available without conditions. It's about forgiving behavior without changing access. It's about explaining pain while leaving the door wide open for it to happen again. Many people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are ultimatums, coldness, or punishment. They're not. Boundaries are information. They teach others how to treat you by showing what changes when they don't. When boundaries are weak or inconsistent, betrayal becomes low risk. The person learns something dangerous. I can do this and still stay close. I can cross this line and nothing really changes. Once someone learns that, they don't need to be malicious to repeat the behavior. They just need to be human. I saw this pattern clearly in someone I cared deeply about. They were repeatedly let down by the same friend, missed commitments, broken promises, subtle disrespect. Every time they talked it through, accepted the apology, and moved on. Nothing changed, not because the friend was evil, but because the relationship structure taught them that apologies were enough. Behavior never had to improve. And this is one of the hardest truths to accept. Your tolerance trains people how to treat you. Weak boundaries often come from good intentions. You don't want conflict. You want to be understanding. You believe in second chances. You fear being seen as too much. So you absorb discomfort quietly. You normalize disappointment. You explain away patterns that should have been addressed. But here's the cost. Each time you ignore a boundary violation, you teach your nervous system that safety is negotiable. Over time, you stop trusting others and yourself. The weak boundary pattern also explains why betrayal often escalates. It rarely jumps straight to major harm. It starts small: lateness, excuses, subtle disrespect, emotional withdrawal. If those go unaddressed, the line moves. And once the line moves far enough, the betrayal feels shocking, even though the path was gradual. Boundaries don't stop betrayal by controlling others. They stop betrayal by changing incentives. When someone knows that crossing a line will reduce access, closeness, trust, or opportunity, they pause. When they know nothing changes, they proceed. This is why people who appear strong are often betrayed less. Not because they're feared, but because they're predictable. Their responses are consistent. Their standards are visible. People know where the line is, and they know it matters. So how do you strengthen boundaries without becoming closed or aggressive? First, match words with action. If you say, "I can't accept this behavior," but continue as usual, the message is cancelled. Boundaries only exist when behavior leads to change. Second, reduce access instead of increasing explanation. Over-explaining invites debate. Adjusting access teaches reality. You don't need to convince someone to respect you. You need to respond as if respect is required. Third, separate forgiveness from access. You can forgive someone internally and still decide they don't get the same role in your life. Forgiveness heals you. Boundaries protect you. There's also a deeper layer many people miss. Sometimes we keep weak boundaries because betrayal feels familiar. If you grew up around emotional inconsistency, you may unconsciously recreate it. Not because you want pain, but because predictability, even painful predictability, can feel safer than the unknown. Healing means noticing that pull and choosing differently. One of the most powerful shifts happens when you stop asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and start asking, "What did this behavior cost them?" If the answer is nothing, the pattern makes sense. Strengthening boundaries doesn't require confrontation scenes or dramatic exits. Most of the time, it's quiet. You stop volunteering information. You stop prioritizing someone who deprioritized you. You stop giving people front row seats to your life when they've shown they don't protect what they see. And something interesting happens when you do this. People who benefited from weak boundaries often react strongly. They accuse you of changing, of being distant, of being selfish. That reaction is data. It tells you who relied on your lack of boundaries to stay comfortable. People who respect you will adapt. This chapter isn't about blaming yourself for being betrayed. It's about reclaiming your agency. Betrayal teaches you where your boundaries were unclear. Growth begins when you clarify them. In the final chapter, we'll bring everything together. How these patterns combine. How to spot them early, and how to rebuild trust without becoming guarded or cold. Chapter 8. The repetition pattern. Why betrayal stops only. When the setup changes by now, one truth should be clear. Betrayal is rarely a single, isolated event. It's usually the final move in a sequence that has been quietly unfolding for a long time. This is the repetition pattern, the reason betrayal feels like it keeps finding you, even when you swear you've learned your lesson. Repetition doesn't mean you're broken. It means the environment, the expectations, or the rules stayed the same. Most people focus on who betrayed them. They replay faces, words, moments. But repetition lives in the setup. The same types of people, the same unspoken rules, the same tolerance for early warning signs. Until something in that setup changes, the pattern has room to return. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Betrayal repeats when the cost-benefit equation still favors the betrayer. Think about that carefully. Every betrayal you've experienced made sense to the person who did it. Not morally, but psychologically. They gained something or avoided something: status, safety, comfort, approval, relief. They didn't lose enough to make the choice painful. That's why healing isn't about becoming colder. It's about becoming clearer. I once spoke with someone who said, "I don't trust anyone anymore." But when we talked longer, it became obvious. They still trusted each other quickly. They still overshared, still gave people access before they had earned it. What changed wasn't their behavior. What changed was their hope. And that combination, high access, low hope, is how bitterness is born. And the repetition pattern teaches a different lesson. Trust is not an emotion, it's a structure. You don't trust because you feel close. You trust because someone has shown consistency across time, pressure, and inconvenience. You trust because their behavior stays aligned when the room changes, when the crowd shifts, when the reward disappears. This is where many people finally reclaim their power. They stop trusting words, they stop trusting intensity, they stop trusting shared pain or fast bonding. They start trusting patterns. Patterns don't lie. People do, but patterns don't. So how do you break the repetition pattern? First, slow down access. Speed is the enemy of discernment. Betrayal often feels shocking because closeness arrived before proof. When you slow relationships down, you give patterns time to reveal themselves. Second, test trust with low-stakes moments. Small disappointments are data. Watch how someone handles a minor boundary, a small no, a moment where you can't show up perfectly. People reveal themselves when nothing big is on the line. Third, notice consistency under pressure. Anyone can be kind when things are easy. Character shows up when there's risk: social risk, emotional risk, reputational risk. Fourth, update the rules after harm. If betrayal happens and nothing structurally changes, the lesson hasn't been learned. Change who gets access. Change what behavior is tolerated. Change how quickly you explain yourself. This isn't about punishment, it's about alignment. One of the hardest but most freeing realizations is this: you don't need to confront everyone who betrayed you. You don't need them to understand. No, you don't need closure conversations that reopen wounds. Sometimes growth looks like silence. Not the fearful kind, but the decisive kind. You move on with the information. You also stop trying to prove your worth to people who traded it away. You stop auditioning for loyalty. You stop shrinking to stay connected. You let people miss the version of you that was easier to use. And slowly, something shifts. The people who remain in your life feel different, calmer, less dramatic, less conditional. You notice fewer emotional spikes and fewer apologies. Trust begins to feel stable instead of exciting. That's when you realize something important. Healthy relationships are not intense. They're steady. They don't require you to monitor the room. They don't require you to justify your needs. They don't disappear when things get inconvenient. And this is the reward for breaking the repetition pattern. You may still experience disappointment. You may still encounter selfishness. But betrayal loses its grip on you because it no longer surprises you and it no longer defines you. And here's the final reframe that brings peace. Betrayal was never a sign that you trusted too much. It was a sign that you trusted without structure. Now you have a structure, you have patterns, you have clarity, you have a choice. In the final outro, we'll bring everything together. How to move forward without bitterness, how to rebuild trust without losing softness, and how to carry this knowledge without letting it harden your heart. Because the goal was never to close yourself off. The goal was to stop bleeding in places that never learned how to protect themselves. If you've stayed with this audiobook until now, it means something inside you was looking for more than comfort. You weren't just trying to feel better. You were trying to understand, and that matters, because understanding is what turns pain into power. Betrayal leaves behind more than heartbreak. It leaves confusion. It makes you question your instincts, your memory, your judgment. It whispers that you should have known better, seen it sooner, and protected yourself more. And over time, that voice can make you smaller, more guarded, less alive. But here is the truth that reframes everything. Betrayal didn't happen because you were naive. It happened because you were human in a world where not everyone has learned how to carry responsibility, courage, or integrity when it costs them something. Throughout this audiobook, we didn't talk about betrayal as a single act. We broke it down into patterns: trade, convenience, status, fear, story, conformity, weak boundaries, repetition. Not to make you cynical, but to make you fluent. Because once you can read patterns, you stop personalizing what was never personal in the first place. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" And you start asking, "What system was I in?" That shift is everything. One of the hardest lessons to accept is that not everyone you care about is capable of caring for you in the same way. Some people lack courage, some lack consistency, some cannot tell themselves the truth, and no amount of loyalty from you can fix that. This is not a call to cut everyone off. It's a call to stop over-investing in people who have shown you, through patterns, not promises, that they cannot meet you where you stand. You don't need to punish them. You don't need to convince them. You don't need revenge or dramatic closure. You need alignment. Alignment means your expectations match reality. Your access matches behavior. Your trust matches proof. When those things align, betrayal loses its power over you, not because it never happens again, but because it no longer destabilizes you when it does. There's a quiet confidence that comes from clarity. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to explain. It simply adjusts. You give less access to those who disappear under pressure. You stop chasing groups that reward silence over integrity. You slow down trust instead of rushing intimacy. You let people earn closeness instead of granting it by default. And something unexpected happens. Your relationships become calmer, less dramatic, less confusing, less emotionally expensive. You may notice fewer people around you, but the ones who remain feel different. They don't require you to perform. They don't punish you for boundaries. They don't rewrite history to protect their ego. They don't vanish when things get inconvenient. They stay. Not perfectly, not without flaws, but with consistency. And consistency is the rarest form of loyalty. There is also a grief that comes with this growth. You may mourn the version of you who trusted freely, who believed loyalty would always be returned, who didn't know how quickly people could turn when conditions changed. Let yourself grieve that version gently. They weren't wrong. They were unprotected. Now, you are protected by awareness. Awareness doesn't make you colder. None, it makes you steadier. You still feel deeply, but you don't bleed everywhere. You still care, but you don't abandon yourself to prove it. You still hope, but you no longer ignore evidence to keep hope alive. That balance is maturity. And if there's one final truth to carry forward, let it be this. Betrayal is not the opposite of trust. Confusion is. When you are clear, even betrayal becomes information instead of devastation. You don't need to harden your heart to survive. You need to stop giving it to places that never learned how to hold it. As you move forward, ask better questions. Not, do they like me? But, how do they act when it costs them? Not, do I feel close? But, have they been consistent? Not, should I forgive? But, what access makes sense now? Those questions will guide you better than any promise ever could. But if this audiobook helped you put words to something you've lived through, you're not alone. And if you know someone who is still trapped in self-blame, still replaying conversations, still wondering why it happened, share this with them. Not to reopen wounds, but to give them clarity. Clarity doesn't erase the past, but it frees the future. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take what serves you. Leave what doesn't, and walk forward lighter, not because people changed, but because you did.